Joining us in our Washington studios is trade expert Ronce Almond, a partner at the Wicks Group. Ronce, welcome to our program.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
So many moving parts to this story, and I really want to begin with Liu He's visit to Washington. Clearly, there are fundamental differences between Washington and Beijing. Is it your sense that the two sides can actually narrow their differences during this trip, and in what areas?
It's a great question. First, it's important to acknowledge that this is a positive step forward. So the Vice Premier's trip to Washington, 4-day trip, is, if you look back at it, there was a 2-day trip led by Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin at the beginning of the month. Now we have a 4-day trip.
So talking is always a good thing.
Yeah, so the talking has gone from 2 days to 4 days. So it seems that there's more on the table to discuss, which in a way is good. I think the first round of negotiations in Beijing helped identify potential pathways forward. I think this next round of negotiations here in Washington allow both parties to kind of flesh out those issues and see if they can come to some type of agreement. And it's important, I think, that the Vice Premier is not just meeting with the administration, right? He's also meeting with members of Congress and other stakeholders here in Washington in order to kind of flesh out some of these issues.
How much did Trump's apparel reversal on telecom giant ZTE, first slapping on sanctions and severe punishment, then going back and saying we're going to make sure Chinese workers don't lose their jobs. We're going to work with Chinese President Xi Jinping because perhaps the punishment was too harsh. How much was that instrumental in Liu He being in Washington, and how is that playing out on Capitol Hill? President Trump has gotten a lot of criticism from members of his own party.
Yes, Mr. Trump's tweet that started this whole discussion, I think it was not by accident.
What do you think about that? I mean, what is the goal here? Is this part of a strategy?
Well, I think the timing was laying the groundwork for potential good discussions here in Washington. I mean, I don't think that Mr. Trump accidentally just said, we're going to relax our approach to ZTE. That decision was made back in April, but actually the ZTE agreement was made last March in 2017. It dealt with issues in terms of enforcement from the Commerce Department in relation to the Iran sanctions. So it's a very touchy subject. But the president's action to kind of signal that he was going to take a more relaxed approach on this very important national security.
This was a sudden reversal, Ronce.
Yes.
It wasn't a mildly different approach. We went from A to Z.
Yeah, exactly right. And we all should understand, though, that ZTE its business doesn't exist in a vacuum. So it purchases a bunch of its components from U.S. companies, in particular Qualcomm, based out of San Diego. And once the ZTE decision was made back in April, Qualcomm was actually starting to lay off workers because some of its component parts that it was selling to ZTE, one of its major purchases, could have been threatened. So there's a lot of linkages involved here. And that's something we always have to respect in these trade negotiations.
And let's talk about the public hearings going on the proposed Section 301 tariffs. They started yesterday, 3-day hearings on intellectual property, technology transfer, business owners, a lot of entrepreneurs are testifying. Are these types of hearings, do they actually change the administration's position?
Great question, because as you just mentioned with the ZTE issue, well, Mr. Trump seemed to kind of make that decision on his own without any type of public notice and comment. But I think it is important from a legal perspective here, and if you look at it from Washington, the U.S. legal spectrum, once you start these administrative actions, you have to by law take into account some of these things, whether they're meaningful, whether the Trump administration will actually listen to what stakeholders.
That's the question.
Yeah, I think it all depends, right? It depends whether the Trump administration is going to play the long game or the short game. And in the long game, I'm not sure that these public comments matter that much. But in the short game, in the next 6 months, we have the congressional elections here in November 2018. So he has to be aware of the political constituencies impacted by his trade policies.
Well, we shall see. Ronce Almond, thank you so much.